Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tales of the Cocktail Seminar, Made Gin China, a new perspective on the contemporary craft gin movement. As we know, gin distilling is not new to the spirits world, ranging from traditional London dry gin to contemporary Australian gin. What can Chinese gin distiller introduce? Today, our panelists of experts in mixology, education, gin products, and gin distillation will guide us through to unveil gin made in China. So we're going to break it down to these four perspectives through the gin history and modern gin brands perspectives, from domestic gin markets to production in China. We could see the early trends on how Chinese gin brands are positioning themselves to bring new perspectives and to broaden the global landscape of gin industry. Will they change how the game is played? Before we dive in, allow me to introduce our four brilliant panelists, me included. Tong Li, Li Tong, she's one of the best bartenders in China. Not only she won the World Championship of Patron Perfectionist in 2017, but also she's the co-founder and the managing partner of one of the best and well-established bars in South China, Lotus Lounge. She will cover bar scene in China section. Our second panelist, Hannah Lanfear, one of the best WSET spirits educator out there. She founded the mixing class in UK, beloved by students from all over the world, then awarded Imbibe Educator of the Year 2019. She's also the IWSC Spirits Competition Judge. Gin history and recipes will be delivered by her. Our third panelist, she has abundant tasting and judging experiences. I cannot even imagine like how many gins that she knows. Caroline Ashford, AKA the Gin Queen, a gin writer and judge who was awarded Icons of Gin Communicator of the Year in 2020. She will show us her angle on global gin trends and Chinese gin market and opportunity. Lastly, my name is Sky Huo. I was a bartender and now a spirits educator like Hannah. I founded a spirits education school in Hong Kong called Spirits Cave. I'm also the master distiller and co-founder of Lavaju Distillery in China. Today, I'm speaking as a Chinese distiller to give you a quick glance at Chinese gin market and production. Then introduce some iconic Chinese micro gin distilleries and my own gin projects, who and where they are the gin producers and what unique stories they're telling. Now, let's please welcome Li Tong to introduce the glamorous bar scene in China.
Hello everyone. This is Tong from Canton, China. I have been in the industry for over 8 years now. You know, one of the perks as a bartender is I can travel a lot around China or abroad. That makes me got the chance to understand more about the different taste preference of various regions' customers. As today's topic, Make Gin China, what's Chinese consumers' first impression of gin? I must say, it's the dry martini from James Bond's movies. It's so famous. Almost every customer's first order of cocktail is a dry martini. Everyone wants to taste what a super spy favorite drink. Beside that, gin and tonic is one of the highest recommended drink by the bartenders all over the China. When someone don't know what to drink, gin and tonic is always a good choice. Juniper berry isn't our Chinese people familiar here. We don't use juniper berry in the food or anything, but people really like the citrusy or floral flavor in the gin. In the past few years, there are many gin bars have been opened all over the place. According to the Spirit magazine in China, they said a gin-based RTD will become the next hot trend in the coming years. But what kind of gin is the Chinese consumer's choice? One of highly respected industrial KOL, Back Gold Channel, which is one of my really good friends, tells me it has to be clean but complex at the same time. Also, it's delicately balanced flavor structure, for example, like tangery, beefeater, which are very classic that lots of people like to order. Another industrial KOL, Cash Story, thinks differently. He likes gin with a unique aroma that will make people very easy to remember. For example, Nordash, Monkey 47, Hendrix. Gin Time magazine wrote, if the package and bottle are pretty, people will like to give a try. In summary, popular gin has following characters. Firstly, delicately balanced, fresh, floral, and unique taste profile, like bayberry, strawberry, magnolia, flower, goat milk, or even lobster. Second, people like very, very pretty bottle and beautiful spirit color, like maybe pink or purple. And the third, people also like some China element. For example, local ingredients. People want to try new tastes. In conclusion, I think gin spirit is doing very, very well in China, full of imagination. Here are the reasons. First, gin has low sugar and low calorie. Young people with healthy lifestyle will like it. Second, due to COVID, people cannot go out to eat. Making cocktails at home is becoming popular. Gin and tonic is very easy to make, so gin is the best choice of base spirit to mix drink at home. Third, in many Chinese bars, gin is the most popular base spirit. Any bartender know how to use it. It's the #1 choice for bartender to use to create their cocktails. It's simple, reasonable cost, and easy to mix with the other flavors. And the next reason, young people first order of cocktail is heavily influenced by the bartender. They like simple, pleasant, friendly pricing, and with no pressure of history. Therefore, gin fits all above. And the last reason is craft gin become very popular in the world, and it's influenced Chinese distilleries and distillers. As one of only spirits can be made in China, it can add local ingredients, all the elements we want, imagination and creativity in. So everybody wants to make their own gin. That's all I want to share. And thanks, guys. I will give back to Sky for the next slide.
Thank you much. Thank you very much for sharing. It's definitely an insightful view on what gins that Chinese customers are drinking, and most importantly, why they're drinking that. To look behind the scene, to know that what we're really drinking, how did the botanical spirit exist in the first place? Let's welcome Hannah to give us, to guide us through the history of gin.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I am sure that I was brought onto the panel in part because I'm a spirits educator, but I have had some insight into gin because I used to work in a gin distillery, and I once did a trade mission to go and try and spread our gin and populate it around the world. And I got to visit China and really take a look at what the gin industry was like there. And this is maybe almost 8 years ago, I think. And it was fascinating because at that time, gins very much were these international global brands that were on the back bar, and actually craft spirits of any kind hadn't got much of a look in. But fast forward to today, and that's obviously, as we've just heard, a real change in the scene there. And gin is certainly poised to have this kind of explosion. So I'm so excited to hear about this kind of what shall we say, grassroots craft distilling industry that's starting to crop up and pop up. It's very exciting to me. So just to talk a little bit then about gin and gin history. Look, it's a well-trodden story and I don't want to go over the whole thing, but we should perhaps frame that gin is a flavoured spirit. It's always been that way. You know, we're making spirit and flavoring with botanicals, but and juniper is of course the most important. But just to talk a bit about flavored spirits, I think it's worth saying that actually all spirits started life as a flavored spirit. And the reason behind that is that botanicals were deemed to be good for you. This is, if you can imagine, all the way back before we had Boots the Chemist or whatever your local example of that is, people used to have to medicate themselves using local botanicals. And so all of the spirits that you see that start to unfold, it was always about trying to capture the medicinal aromatic properties of these botanicals. And when you start looking at the history of distilling, it's very interesting, goes all the way back. But I just want to say that when we look at alcoholic beverages altogether, that China has got this incredible wealth, not just of distilling history, but also of flavoring alcoholic beverages. And I learned that a few years ago that the oldest chemically proven alcoholic beverage that was made with botanicals was found to be from China, and it was around 7,000 BC. So, you know, this is actually kind of part of the cultural heritage of China. And I think it's right and proper that these botanical spirits come to the fore now. So to sort of touch upon gin and its history, juniper is an age-old medicine, you know, medieval medicine, and has been used for so many different things, for indigestion, gout, flatulence. It has a property because it's rich in terpenes, and these are things that are that have medicinal properties. It was known as an emmenagogue, which is a word that I feel 10% cleverer just for having learned. But an emmenagogue agitates the womb, so it was used as a very early form of contraception. Gin martinis for the win. There you go. And you're welcome. The earliest recipe that we have for one of these juniper spirits dates back to 1495, and it would have been from the Low Countries. So, you know, this area that we would describe as northern France, Belgium, the Netherlands. And at that time, this spirit would have been, you know, incredibly expensive because it used botanicals in addition to that juniper that were from the world. So it was really exotic, you know, a showcase of these wonderful things that had been found and returned to Europe. Now we reframe that in the modern world, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. But yeah, something very exotic and a way of demonstrating these wonderful aromas and flavors and medicinal properties. So there you go. That's a little insight into gin. And of course, it's evolved and moved around the world, and we're in the middle of an absolute gin explosion. So I think actually let's just touch upon the role of women as well, because it's part of the intention of this panel to discuss how will the women distillers of China be involved in this movement and help to develop it. And often written out of history, although I've read some fascinating books and articles, come at me if you want to know all about them. The role of women in history is often erased because historians were writing about interesting people who did interesting things, and women were not deemed to be interesting. They were the ones that were doing, you know, the manual tasks, the sort of domestic work, and it wasn't considered important. But if you go even further back in time, you had this kind of gendered role of hunter v gatherer, and it was certainly this gender split. And women would have been doing the gathering, which meant that you were out there plucking things, tasting them, and determining whether they were safe to eat, tasty, and this knowledge and this insight and the way that women sort of mastered that skill meant that actually our physiology developed in a completely different way, because our olfactory bulbs, which is where we decipher these aromas, became richer in connections, and even today that still exists. So I think we have in a gendered way this perhaps connection to botanicals, this sort of deep-rooted historical understanding of them in the way that we work with them. So kind of makes perfect sense to me that women become an important part of gin's movement in China. And next slide, if you please, Guy. I want to talk a little bit about that as well, because, you know, circling back to this idea about botanicals being a medicine, in countries, Western countries like, well, I can speak for the UK, I think I can speak for the USA, Caroline can speak to Australia possibly, we don't really have that connection any longer to botanicals and their medicinal properties. In some countries, people still genuinely do. And in China, I feel like botanical medicine is a really important part of society. So to me, it makes perfect sense. Again, now to talk a bit about the traditional botanical recipe, you know, juniper, coriander seed, angelica root, citrus peel, licorice. I can't think if there's anything else I've missed that's important, but in any case, with that juniper being the central piece, that piney flavor, to that we are then going to add these other things. And you can almost summarize them as something earthy, something floral, perhaps a touch of spice, some citrus aromatics or fruitiness. And this becomes actually a frame that can then be taken and played with, much like a classic cocktail. And to me, that's really exciting, because modern gin now, we're not just seeing a traditional replica of that recipe in different sort of quantities of each botanical. We're seeing distillers take this and then flip it. And to the next slide, if you please, we then have this sort of reinvention that can reflect locality. Now, I think China is such an exciting prospect to demonstrate this, because in terms of botanical diversity, China has this, well, or is the country that is second most rich in botanical diversity. And that's astonishing, but it's also a huge country that has a lot of different climates, you know, different seasonality, and the way that can be reflected in gin, I think is so exciting, because the Western world doesn't know too much about China. You know, we have a very sort of introspective concern about ourselves. Maybe that's true of many countries, in fact, but I think it would be wonderful to take these ideas about these different locales, these different provinces, and demonstrate them through gin. So I think that's incredibly exciting, reinventing that classic recipe. And then I think the final point of this, you know, we talk about a geographical indication. And for flavored spirits, where we typically start with a neutral base, it's very difficult sometimes to then twin that spirit to a locale, because the neutral base is neutral. It's not really telling you much about provenance or place. The botanicals will do, however. Now, in the TTB, which is the governing body for spirits in the US, and the EU has its own set of regulations about different spirit categories. Spirit base in the EU must be neutral. In the US, you can have distillates of a lower distillation strength on which to then base your gin recipe. And I think there's something very interesting there about China and its traditional spirits such as baijiu. You have an exceptional sense of provenance and place with some of these spirits, and there aren't any rules about what you can use yet in China, because we haven't got any regulations about gin. So it's a blank canvas and something that can be explored to its fullest by these early sort of rumblings of craft gin distilling there. That's me done. Over and out.
Thank you so much, Hannah. What a knowledgeable lesson. I didn't even pay you for this lesson. Indeed, China does cover an area of approximately 9.6 million square kilometers, but biodiversity is just like huge, with citrus and spice and crops, etc., etc. And now we've covered history. Let's fast forward to a current world and to see what does the modern gin world looks like and what is trending, let's give the stage to Caroline.
Thank you, Sky. Thanks, Hannah. I'm probably going to touch on a few things that Tong and Hannah have kind of touched on, but I think it's worth sort of getting a perspective on where we are at the moment. Obviously, we've just come off the back of a pandemic, and obviously Brexit has been an issue as well for everybody. So where are we at in terms of you know, gin globally? So booze sales are returning to kind of pre-pandemic levels, particularly in China. And what we've also seeing in China is that not only has their spend on alcohol returned to pre-pandemic levels, it's actually increased in terms of people trading up and buying a more premium product. Now, premiumization in spirits has been, you know, growing for the last few years, so that's not surprising. As Tong pointed out, there's been a shift to drinking alcohol at home. So again, people are learning, you know, more about cocktails. And then there was a significant shift globally to online shopping, particularly for alcohol, that will probably continue, you know, as we go back to the normal world. In the UK, the gin industry is still strong, although there's lots of data to suggest that there's been a decline. I think there's not necessarily been a decline. I think what we're seeing is a consolidation of the market, where, you know, whereas, you know, the smaller distilleries would bring out 8 products, now they're having to really think about you know, some really core products to put their, you know, to put their marketing budget behind. It's just not sustainable to keep producing more and more lines. I think they realize now that, you know, you've got to really have a targeted approach. And obviously flavored gin has been a really huge trend the last few years, you know, lots of fruit flavored, brightly colored gins, which, you know, are quite polarizing from a traditional gin point of view, but have undoubtedly brought new gin consumers to the market. But again, what we're seeing now is that, you know, that's kind of almost being phased out now. So globally, gin is still expected to grow. It's not going to slow down. I think part of the reason why it's not going to slow down is that there are other interesting countries coming to play, really, like China. China and Brazil are the 2 fastest growing consumers of gin at the moment. I cannot give you the specific source of that knowledge, but that is the, you know, the data that I've been given. So that's obviously really exciting. In terms of trends, I'm not going to speak specifically about flavors. I'm going to talk about some general trends that some are very connected to gin and some are just kind of around distilling in general, the things that we really need to kind of take note of. RTDs have already been mentioned, ready to drink. They are very popular in the US. Gin and tonics, gin and soda, particularly in the US and the UK. We're also seeing in Australia a kind of growth in that area. But they're also including various gin cocktails. In Australia, we have, you know, bottled cocktails, we have canned martinis, which are fantastic, you know, canned Negronis, really tapping into the growing demand for flavored drinks with a lower alcohol content. A lot of these canned cocktails tend to be a much lower ABV than you would be served if you went into a bar. And that kind of ties in with the growing kind of health concerns. And, you know, trying to sort of fit our socializing into sort of busy schedules. The other factor is that they're often cheaper in comparison to, you know, a full-size cocktail in a bar. These tend to be smaller serves. And so it kind of makes an ideal choice for younger consumers. So the expected growth for RTDs is a CAGR of 13.4% up until from now until 2030. So it's going to be a significant area that I don't think gin distillers can ignore. And I think, you know, there's some real opportunities there you know, for the Chinese market. Again, I touched on low and no alcohol. Again, you know, health conscious drinkers looking for a lower alcohol option. There's been huge strides. You know, once upon a time, you'd go into a bar and you'd ask for something, you know, no alcohol, and you'd just be presented with, you know, an orange juice. Now, if you go into, you know, some premium bars, you're presented with, you know, an amazing list of, you know, really cleverly put together cocktails that you don't feel cheated, that you're not drinking, that it's a really enjoyable experience. There are some massive issues around calling a product gin if it's got no alcohol, because obviously, as we know, gin has to be 37.5% ABV to be called gin. So there's huge sort of concerns about labeling. But again, I think there are some people doing it really well. Gordon's, for example, have just called theirs 0%. There's no mention of gin on the label. Again, I feel like it's a really interesting opportunity that, again, can't be ignored by distillers. Excuse me. Another thing that, again, distillers can't really ignore is sustainability. And without sort of getting into greenwashing territory, the issue with distilling is one of the biggest consumers of energy and water, you know, just in the production of gin. And that is before we get into, you know, how you make bottles, moving freight around the world, buying botanicals from, you know, from Europe when you're in America. There's definitely work to be done in terms of, you know, really creating a sustainable industry that takes responsibility for what it's doing. So we're seeing some movement in that area. Brands like Plymouth have changed their bottle design to reduce the amount of glass they use in their bottles. Excuse me. Warner's Distillery have removed the wax seal on the top of their bottles. And then we've got brand new distilleries like Four Pillars. So I'm going to have a glass of water.
Have a little sip of gin, Caroline.
I might have a little.
Dialing in from past midnight. I think you deserve a little.
I know. So
definitely cocktail hour where you are.
There's been a new distillery. Four Pillars, obviously really well-known Australian gin brand, has just opened a huge kind of extension to their existing distillery. It's 100% running on renewable energy. They've created a fantastic sort of art installation, which is actually a copper veil, which looks beautiful, but actually has functionality because the copper piping is actually going to be taking water from the stills and cooling it down, ready for like reuse within the distilling process. So that's really interesting. Other brands like East London Liquor Company, which announced recently that you can take any bottle into their distillery and have it refilled with gin. And there are other distilleries here who are allowing consumers to return their bottles for a refill. So there's lots of movement in that area. I just think it's something to be aware of, that it's a great industry, but there are huge issues around you know, the use of energy and water in making a product. So the other exciting thing about where we're at in terms of trends is the emerging markets. Obviously, we're here today to talk about the Chinese gin market. But there have been, you know, precedents set by, you know, Japan. There's some fantastic gins coming out of Japan. India are also producing some, you know, really interesting local products. Obviously, Australia is kind of, you know, we've been going a little bit longer now, but we're definitely kind of almost not the blueprint, but an example of how a country that isn't necessarily known for producing gin has really taken its unique botanical infrastructure. We have 16,000 plants that grow in Australia that don't grow anywhere else in the world. So, you know, there's almost a kind of link with China there, whereas you've got, China has got, you know, an unlimited resource as well, that biodiversity that Hannah mentioned. Another sip of gin, I think.
Caroline, I remember going to Australia and I was talking to everyone's best pal, Mitch Bushell, and he was working for a distributor at the time, and I was like, Mitch, I've got this wonderful gin, let me tell you about it. And he was like, Hannah, people drink brown spirits here.
Yeah.
And look at it now, like 10 years later, I mean, it's phenomenal what's happened with gin.
It's still whiskey and rum, but I think a lot of the whiskey distillers kind of went into gin not thinking it was going to be that exciting, but actually if you speak to most whiskey distillers who are making gin, they really appreciate the creativity that goes into making gin, the tweaks, the trying out different botanicals. So, you know, it's a wonderfully exciting, creative sort of outlet for people. When we look at gin styles and how that ties into sort of opportunities for Chinese distillers, London dry gin is still the best-selling kind of category globally. But if you look at the number of entries into some of the major competitions like the San Francisco World Spirits Awards and the IWSC, which, you know, Hannah obviously judges for, you'll see that the number of contemporary gins that are being entered is a really big growing category. And obviously, as Hannah's mentioned, you know, London dry gin, it's a production process. It's not a GI product that has to be made in gin. And as Hannah mentioned, you know, one of the regulations, the EU regulations, is that London dry gin has to be made with neutral grain spirit. And I think what's really fascinating from my perspective is looking at distillers around the world who are exploring other materials to use as a base for their spirit. So earlier in the year, I was judging at the American Distilling Institute Spirits competition, and I was looking at contemporary gins, and we came across gins that had used agave spirit as their base, used cane spirit, wine. You know, grape is huge in Australia. We're a wine growing, you know, a wine making nation. So it seems obvious to us to use grape to make a spirit. There's two distilleries, so Hartshorn in Australia and Black Robin in New Zealand, that use distilled whey, which is again a really interesting base. Hartshorn actually using whey as a byproduct from their family cheese making business. So they're kind of closing the loop there, which is, you know, really, really, really interesting. There's a distillery in Japan, Kamasa Jozu Distillery in Japan, which is the first producer to use, I'm going to say this wrong, shochu in making their gin. So they've taken a spirit that is, you know, very culturally significant to them, and they've actually using that as their base spirit to really create something you know, that's really connected to Japan. And I feel like this concept is where, you know, we talk about terroir and GI, but I feel like how people use their base spirit, you know, reconnecting with traditional historical spirits of their country is a really fascinating way that, you know, you might actually be able to start thinking about terroir properly. So I just think that's really interesting. So in terms of opportunities for Chinese distillers, Hannah's touched on some, including the biodiversity. I think there are lots and lots of opportunities, and I think, you know, just touching on what I just mentioned in terms of using base spirit, you know, centuries of distillation experience through the production of baijiu. You know, obviously that resource, you know, means that gin distillers can draw on that resource to create, you know, gins with potentially a unique spirit base. Will we have a baijiu based gin? Will that become a base that is a way of, yeah, which is a way, you know, a really interesting way of, yeah, exactly. I'm sure you're going to speak to that. So obviously unique, you know, unique Chinese expressions will come from the local botanicals like, you know, Buddha's hand and lotus flower, which we're going to talk about in Peddler's Gin. But as well, oh, sorry, that's my dog. but we know that botanicals from other countries get used really, really quickly. So for example, you know, yuzu is a, you know, classic Asian citrus traditionally used, you know, in Japan. I think Kyoto Distillery in Japan were one of the first, you know, distillers to incorporate it. But now we're seeing, you know, it's a global thing. We've got Tarquin's Distillery in Cornwall in the UK who use it. Four Pillars have just released a yuzu, you know, a whole yuzu gin. But what I'm really interested in is how China, with its biodiversity, can use really hyper local ingredients. So they might select an almond, or they might select a Sichuan pepper, but they can specify the town or the village, and really create something that can't be replicated anywhere else in the world. For example, porcelain Shanghai gin, they use Mongolian juniper, which has a slightly different flavor profile from Macedonian and Tuscany juniper. So I think that that connection is really, really important. And I think that's a way to sort of really make something that's very, very Chinese, rather than something that can just be replicated elsewhere around the world. That's me. So we are going to talk about Peddler's Gin because I've been sipping on it for the last hour. I think this is a really great example of you know, where to start in terms of you know, if you haven't tasted Chinese gin before, this is a really good place to start. It was the first Chinese gin produced, actually launched in 2016, which seems like a lifetime ago now. It's 45.7% ABV, so it's kind of getting up there in terms of a more premium product, that higher sort of slightly heading towards overproof. I think bartenders, Tom will speak to this, but you know, bartenders like that higher ABV because it tends to kind of hold on to the botanical flavors a bit more. So when you are using it in cocktails, you're still retaining the gin flavor. So it's made using an alembic pot still, which is very traditional, kind of, you know, round pot still with the, you know, the line arm. But it's vapor infused, which means that the botanicals are held in a basket over the bubbling alcohol. And what that means is that the alcohol passes through the botanical basket. So rather than kind of boiling those botanicals, you're basically lifting the aromas through the botanicals and really capturing them in a sort of fresher way than you would if you were, you know, heating them in the pot. So it's got 22 botanicals in it, and it's inspired this packaging of this particular bottle. The whole concept is inspired by 1930s Shanghai. So what does it taste like? Well, it's got a
I loved that your Aussie accent came out there. What does it taste like?
Oh, did it? What does it taste like? It goes up at the end.
Is it 11 or is it 22? I want to know. I'm curious. It says 11 on the slide, and you said 22.
I know it says 11 on there, and I'm actually looking here, and it's 22. It's 22 botanicals.
Two bottles. That would be no.
That's my fault. My fault. It's 22.
No, don't worry.
It's obviously you know, really, really, really aromatic. It's got, you know, the East Asian mint and citrus and Buddha's hand that come through really well on the nose. They're using peppercorns from the Sichuan province, but what I find is really interesting is that you're getting almost the sweet aromatic side of Sichuan pepper without that kind of, I think they call it mala, that really sort of mouth numbing, you know, completely lost my palate flavor that Sichuan is, you know, known for. Sichuan pepper is known for. So obviously we've got the list of ingredients here, and so what you've got is a really beautiful blend of traditional London dry kind of gin ingredients, your juniper, your angelica, coriander seeds, licorice and cubeb, but then you're marrying that with sort of, you know, Chinese ingredients like East Asian mint, Buddha's hand, Sichuan pepper, Chinese cassia, and lotus flower. Buddha's hand is a citrus, but it tends to be very rindy, so you're not actually getting lots of juice. But what it does give, because it's got so much peel, is that aroma, that aromatic sort of flavor and aroma. So it's, yeah, I mean, a lot of people say it's a bit like lemon combined with rose, but this is just so beautifully aromatic. But you really get, I have to have another sip now. It's got beautiful, beautiful juniper. There's no mistaking that this has got juniper, you know, first and foremost. It's not a kind of gin that you've just thrown lots of different ingredients together. Beautiful gin, lots of citrus. It's really getting the back of my, you know, palate sort of tingling, feels kind of quite juicy. And then you've got this beautiful sort of warming heat from the cassia and the cubeb and the Sichuan pepper. Beautiful mouthfeel. You would not know that this was 45.7%. It's a sign of a really well executed gin if you can sip this neat without, you know, coughing your guts up. How would I drink it? I think this obviously would go brilliantly in a gin and tonic. I would love this with ginger ale and some fresh kind of spanked Asian mint. I think that would be really beautiful. Lift those kind of Asian mint profiles, and the ginger would work really well with those spices. But I also would love to see this in a martini. I think it's really beautiful, bold juniper, the citrus. I think it would, you know, work really, really well. I really love it. My first foray into Chinese gin, and I'm definitely a fan.
Thank you so much, Caroline. But that's obviously all the gins that you tasted showed everything over there. Thank you so much for all your experiences. I think I'm ready, like after this peddler's glass, I'm ready for my presentation now. Here will be the fourth and the last part of today's topic. After looking at a global scale of gin consumption, let's zoom in to see what the Chinese market gin is like. There will be a quick overview on the domestic gin consumptions, amount and volume, and then followed by 3 micro distilleries and their unique stories on how to make an iconic Chinese gin. After that, I'd like to share my recent gin project with you, the Laboju, in an R&D oriented distillery. Hope we'll have a better vision on how future gin market will be in China after our sharing. So let's quickly look at some data that Caroline definitely mentioned before. China has is the largest consumer of spirits. The global retail sales of spirits is about $370 billion US, and Chinese spirits market accounts 22% of it. That's huge. Gin accounts for a small proportion of Chinese spirits sales, but is full of possibilities. Now we zoom into domestic gin consumptions in China. Again, I won't bore our audience with too many numbers. Here are some of the highlights about this 4 base spirits that we call the vodka, rum, gin, and tequila. It's not quite fair to compare brandy or whiskeys in here. So we have compared these 4 spirits imported in China in 2021. On these levels, gin is the 2nd biggest spirit. And now looking at gin solely, what about the past 4 years? We have from 2018 to 2021, gin imported in China is, yes, please, Hannah.
I want to ask a question, Sky, because you know, normally when I've seen you in a classroom setting, I've been teaching and now I get to ask you questions. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yes,
I was just curious because I know that it came up in our run through. I guess that it's that whiskey and brandy are such massive categories. Is that where they've been excluded?
Yes, absolutely. Because for the proportion that I did, the research that I did, whiskey and brandy I think it's cognac mostly. So they are taking the huge part of the first two competitors of this spirits, because again, like even not even my generation, my parents' generation are having this culture of gifting fancy, we call it yangjiu, which is the Western or the Western spirits, which is like a symbol of great gifts, values a lot. It still trickles down in our generation, but somehow, again, that's why we're here talking about gin movement today. It's been a really huge, rapid growth. So again, aged spirit, like generally aged spirits and somehow general white unaged spirits. I think they're not in the same league at this moment, but we'll see. It might grow. Thank you for your question, Hannah. It's a great one.
I am so sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. It's a really good question. Like I thought about this, and then like I'm glad you raised that up. Now we're gonna have quickly just check on this chart, and then you can see that's the data of what I showed earlier. It's the rapid growth of how the gin has been imported in China. It's a huge growth over there, even despite the COVID in 2020. And now let's specifically look at how Chinese gin is performing in China. Here are some highlights on sales. We have growth is 20% per year, which is quite considerable if continues. Brands, we have 200 plus local brands, big or small. Trends, as Tong mentioned earlier, some Chinese consumers are eager to learn and seek for more interesting products. This is where the Chinese local craft gin shines, and branding and packaging matter too as well. We have price range of here, RMB $300, which is like $45 US for a 700 ml bottle. That's just more of an indication on standard of an advised market price on a craft gin bottle. Flavor, local ingredients, consumer groups, younger generation. Definitely Tong mentioned this before. It's just a more of a bigger picture together to see what gin market is like. Scenarios, bars. So RTD, Caroline mentioned, is definitely trending, but with COVID going back and forth, people are eager to have a social scene to communicate with friends. So bar is definitely a chosen one for people to dive in. And then we have the Chinese micro gin distillery. So after knowing the market, now let's look at some good examples on how these local brands are born and tell their stories. So not like London Dry, Chinese gin hasn't had a global recognized legal definition yet. So I took the liberty over here to draw some outlines on Chinese gin definition, ingredients and flavor, production, branding, and people. So each of our three iconic Chinese gins is fulfilling some of the perspectives to proudly call themselves Chinese gin. First thing first, we have the paddlers, 香饭小酒. We'll showcase ingredients and branding to elaborate why paddlers is probably one of the most popular Chinese gins out there. So it's founded, again, Caroline covered this in the tasting session. It's founded in 2016, and that makes it quite special because it's a combination of the local Chinese ingredients, the botanicals, and the ideas from Western and the Far East, and it's handcrafted in China. It has won multiple international and domestic spirits awards. The ingredients, organic, botanical, foraged from all over China. The distilling, the ingredients, and it's celebrating Chinese flavors. And then let me show you, that's what Caroline was mentioning, the Buddha hand. And then branding is something that I would like to highlight as well. They're so confident, they're confident enough to highlight on the color, which is red, the iconic color of the Chinese culture, and to put into their designing. And they even go far enough to to design their own fonts. The peddlers, gin, and even the Chinese characters, their own fonts to enhance their brand image, along with some mahjong sets and the tricycle, which is the real peddler would ride on to sell their goods. That's some quite interesting perspective. So second distillery, we have Balang. We'll focus on production and people. Balang was established in 2016. Its factory stands 200 meters from coast near the estuary of Jiulong River in Zhangzhou, Fujian province. It's on the southeast coastal side of China. Like what Caroline was mentioning before, China has the diversity, and then if there are some really local ingredients that it's a good example. I think Balan is a really interesting example to prove this case. So Zhangzhou is a city that's where the distillery is located. It's famous for the food industry city and the major origin of waxberry, pomelo, and other subtropical fruits. And like what we showed over here, their ingredients are mainly from domestic. The vast land of China that offers many best origins of herbs and spice. You have the coriander seeds and cinnamon from Guangxi, angelica roots from Gansu, licorice roots from Inner Mongolia, and then for Balang's juniper berry, there are some domestic juniper berries as well. They also infuse their local elements into their gin, waxberries, Sojong black tea from Wuyi Mountain, Tieguanyin tea from Anxi. They all are the best of their origins. That's quite interesting to highlight on what the local produces. The people. So about the people, their founder, distiller Alex Tian, he studied chemistry and started experimenting distilling absinthe and gin in 2016 and started his journey distilling more spirits like rum, and other stuff. So focusing on natural ingredients and traditional distilling craft. So interestingly enough, they just launched their first Chinese absinthe, a silver cat absinthe with high Thojong content. I'm quite interested in this one as well, talking about flavored spirits, right? Now we have the third one, the ramblers. So ingredients and people are where we're going to focus on. Here's their core range, as you can see over here. The Rambler Distillery is located in Yunnan, Shangri-La, the southwest of China, at a plateau of 3,300 meters. With higher altitude, we have lower boiling point. So compared to traditional distillation, the aroma of gin produced is closer to original flavor of the juniper berries, coriander, citrus bill, etc. So the second specialty of them is their water. So Shangri-La is located at the source of China's water resources and has a reputation of the first bay of Yangtze River. They say they use the Shangri-La snow mountain melt water, which is pure and pollution-free, rich in natural minerals and natural sweetness. They also want to make this spirits represent the flavor of Yunnan province for people to experience the local flavors of Shangri-La Plateau and China. So we have the people over here is Fraser and Mia. So Fraser was born in Scotland, raised in New Zealand, have both wine and beer making experiences. That's probably explaining why the water matters so much in Ramblers. And Mia is the partner of his in business and life, interestingly enough. So now we're talking about my project. So before we jump into my project, I'd like to spend a minute on sharing why am I doing this today? Like, why me? Who is this random lady over here? Like, why is she talking about Chinese gin? I was born and raised in mainland China, came to Hong Kong for university. Now 10 years deep in the spirits industry as one of the first generation of Chinese contemporary gin distiller, I am so grateful that to see how far that we've come along to stand already standing on the shoulders of giants. So with a fusion background of me bartending in Eastern and Western, like doing brand ambassador work during spirits education, I believe that sharing knowledge and experiences will accelerate our industry to grow together. Like Hannah mentioned in the WICT webinar this week, like we could all be better and together learning. So being an Asian female working in the spirits industry, that I do feel very obligated to share my experiences and encourage more people to embrace opportunities. That's the reason. So allow me, so back to my project here, Levadu. I'll highlight, oh, thank you for the hearts. So allow me, so there's 3 aspects that I like to highlight about the Levadu: production, team, and product. So Levadu is a wordplay of lab and studio. So it's focused on research and development on products. So it's compared, if compared to bigger scale of distillery, even to bigger micro distillery, it's still very young and small in its infancy. So I would like to consider it as a bigger lab. So it's somewhere that we could think as a R&D team and to assist fellow distillers and spirits educators. So we build very good connections with our facility provider. We work closely with them to design and twist how we want the still. The swan neck goes up, down, or how many extra gin baskets that we want it to be. Maybe in the future, with our experiences, that we could help more newborn distillers to design their own stills. And the team. So we have 3 teams: distillery, which I'm in charge of, development and product. We have a scientific research team. They focus on lab research on our products, on how to improve them. So here's some fancy toys that they have. So Rotavap, ultrasonic, and the VFD. So interestingly enough, Rotavap, it was originally a lab facility, and now every single fancy bar in the world has one. Well, that's more technology advanced, so hooray. So VFD is another fancy toy that the lab has. It's a vortex fluid device, which is a thin film flow chemistry device. So it's just like creating pressure and then film. Anyway, so but last on the list, we have a food chemistry team. So to focus on some R&D products in the future, like Caroline mentioned, R&D could be a future trend as well. That's something that we would like to work on as well. So for the product, mainly the main goal would be to broaden the sensory. I really like the empirical distillery in what they're doing in Copenhagen, and I'm trying my best to forage some great Chinese produce as well. So again, China has this amazing biodiverse, full of ingredients, citrus, spice. Imagining using scientific ways to capture them into spirits. I'm very excited about future products. And I don't know if I could tell you or should tell you over this, but I'm working on a Chinese jasmine and pine gin, and also another like Baijiu-based gin as well. So maybe someday we'll taste it together. When you guys travel, can travel to us and have some Chinese food with that.
I'm so excited. I have
a feast of Chinese food from everywhere. Let's have that. So back to the base spirit. Hannah and Caroline both mentioned that Baijiu. So why not, right? Why not baijiu? We're in China, there's baijiu everywhere, that it could be a total valid base spirits that for a Chinese gin. If I could manage to make all the ingredients with the base spirit cohesive with all the other elements together. So it is still a long way to go. I will try my best to experiment. Just a quick catch up on the future gin markets in China. Here's what I think about. So looking into the future, that I believe the gin market will get bigger, and for brands and for producers. So China has always been the biggest, one of the biggest consumers on spirits and a land of opportunity. So now with upcoming productions of local Chinese gins, even though the industry is still in its infancy in China, but the growth is definitely astonishing. And the deep understanding of Chinese culture and the choice of ingredients could turn into a pioneer guidance for the whole world to grasp on and to start understanding this mass market. Something about Chinese female distiller, you know, like as one of them, I'm here to tell my story with the help of our beautiful panelists. And we are experts at our own field, and there will be more female joining us in spirits industry, and whatever they're doing, spirits educator, brand ambassador, distillers, however they want to do, whatever they want to do, that we're here for them to help them to get into spirits industry. One last thing that I look to mention in the end is the local gin laws. Again, everyone has a touch on that, because it won't be fair to compare Chinese gin in its infancy with like very matured industry in Western world at this moment. But when the time is right, I would like to like invite everyone, or even I would like to provide my expertise to assist on this matter. Yeah, and last but not least, we have a quick discussion. I would like to have to hear your opinions, Caroline and Hannah, on this matter. As like, what do you think? Will China be the new big market for producers, distillers, or anyone? And if so, anything that we, Tong and me, we could help you in the future? What do you think?
Who wants to go first?
I was just going to chip in and say, I'm, you know, as an Australian, I'm really, really excited because I can see, you know, just from looking at where the Australian market was, I can see, you know, how this can be, you know, replicated in China. Obviously, we, you know, as Australians, we have very deep connections with Asia, and, you know, we already export to China, but I'm interested in the idea that we will get more, you know, that we will get more Chinese gins, which I think can only, you know, benefit everyone's palates and understanding, you know, what gin can be. I just think when you mix those cultures, it's always a good thing.
Yeah, I would, to add my thoughts, I think I've said the word exciting so many times, but that's because I truly believe that it is a really exciting market. And, you know, spirits trends are cyclical and some do start to ebb away. And I think gin has got this power to be absolutely huge in a market that likes drinking spirits. Culturally, you like spirits, and that's important because, you know, not every country does have a strong connection to spirits, and you do. And I think taking ownership of gin, taking ownership of these botanicals is huge. Plus, you've got this emerging middle class that's just growing and growing and growing. So I think your native gin culture could be huge, but also I think that that I want to say a promiscuous purchaser, as people start to get into gin and want to try lots from lots of different places. I know that the whole world is going to be chomping at the bit to get into the Chinese market if gin pops off, because you're a huge purchaser. And yeah, the volumes could be absolutely massive, but I'm very excited about this growth of super lovely craft gin. I think what a wonderful place to start with.
Thank you everyone thank you for today's sharing that. I think I learned so much already. And last but not least, please, when everything is back to normal, let's have some Chinese food and Chinese gin together. And it's
Yes,
definitely
please.
not us. Please, let's have.
Can't wait. I'm 100% in.
100%.
And that will be it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Bye.